Welcome to Connect the Dots, a podcast for hungry individuals that love to stay curious, who crave for knowledge, and have an insatiable appetite for growth. My name is Alex Lin. I have coached incredible individuals from around the world and noticed something. Everyone has a story from which someone else can benefit. Why dabble and wait to make mistakes yourself when you can save so much time and learn from the experiences of others? In this podcast, I'll share deeply insightful conversations, acquired wisdom, and proven strategies so you can quickly achieve what you want in your business, relationship, health, and personal development. Chef, food philosopher, and even former TED Talker. Today I have Sherry Strong join me on today's episode where she shares with us her intimate relationship with sugar and how you and I can actually attain sweet freedom. Being addicted isn't always easy to deal with, but she shares with us the ideas and the concepts and the philosophies that she's developed on her own that have helped her create a healthy relationship with itself, being sugar. Join me today as she educates us on the signs that nature is giving us, showing us what we should eat and what we shouldn't, and how to find a healthy and balanced life through food, and how to set a loving table, which makes food so much better in every single way. Enjoy. Sherry, it's so lovely to have you. Thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So for those of you who don't know Sherry, I'm going to give a brief bio on who she is. And my God, this bio is so interesting. You're going to want to tune into this. So today's topic is sweet freedom during a pandemic. Now, things are going crazy, but we want to look at what a chef's point of view is and how she's capitalizing on this particular time of year or this time of era and what she can do as a food philosopher. So for those of you who don't know, Sherry is a chef. She's a food philosopher and nutritionist who is the author of Return to Food and the founder of Sweet Freedom Project. She has a powerful story of sugar. There it is. And for those of you who are listening on podcast, she's just showing us this lovely, lovely piece of art here. So her powerful story starts with sugar and food addiction. And to my understanding, you were formerly twice your current size, which is amazing.
Yeah, not 10'4", Alex. Yeah, I was actually size 16. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. And she was the Victorian Chair of Nutrition in Australia, Melbourne President of Slow Food, and the co-founder of the World Wellness Summit. Having studied human physiology, psychology, behavioral science, and eating patterns of the healthiest cultures on the planet for almost 40 years, she has deconstructed our complex relationship with food, our body, and the planet, and narrowed it down to simple yet revolutionary philosophies, concepts, and strategies that end nutritional confusion. So to help us understand this a bit better, I want to say welcome to the show, Sherry. It's so lovely to have you, and let's jump right in. Is that okay with you?
I'm ready.
Awesome. So this concept of food philosophy or food philosopher, what is a food philosopher exactly, and what do they do?
Yeah, well, if you ask an Australian what a food philosopher is, they'll say they're a wanker. It can come across as a pretend term. Well, philosophy is the love of knowledge and wisdom. And really, since I was 14, I remember hearing Carole King's song, Way Over Yonder. And there's this phrase in it where she says, in a garden of wisdom. And I remember at 14 thinking, oh, I want to be a gardener of wisdom. Mm-hmm. And so I studied food. Like I studied food science, I studied nutrition, health and behavioral sciences. I studied the chefing piece. And what I found was that in both camps, there was confusion, about what it is we're meant to be eating. And I think the confusion often comes not just because we have this absurd notion that we're all meant to eat one optimal diet. There's no such thing. But the other thing is that there's so much influence in the information that we get as the general public. what most people don't realize is that dietitians and nutritionists are often confused, but they're very afraid to admit it. Or the younger they are or the newer they are to the study of it, the more sure they are. And the more you've been in it, the years, you spend in it, you realize how little we know. And so I wanted to actually have a way of teaching people how it is the human species meant to eat. And the only way I could do that was start to look at how we ate. And to look, even though we ate very differently depending on where we were on the planet, there were commonalities of not just what we ate, but how we ate. We're a social species. There's so much to the act of eating that makes us well and healthy and whole. And it's not just about nutrients and macro, micro, things that, feed our body. And it's not just about pleasure. So it's a complex, multifaceted function that really determines our health and well-being, not just as an individual, but as a community, a tribe, a species.
Right. And so if I could, I want to dive deeper into how do we know if we're actually doing it right? I mean, we
Yeah.
have all this information online and, this says, oh, this keto diet's great for you, or this Atkins diet's going to help you lose the weight fast and quick and easy. But in the
Yeah.
end, especially through personal experience, they are actually detrimental to some of the health that go through all this. So in your experience, how do we know you're doing it right? And what lets you know that you're on the right path?
Well, I think one of the things, the folly for most of us is the supposition that there's one right way to do it.
Mhm.
Uh, Eating right involves a lot of, subjective kind of judgment, or often. But as far as getting a sense of like a deeper knowing of what's good for our body, we're intuitively programmed in our DNA to know what we're meant to be eating. Kinesthetically, we're actually born with the ability to determine something that's good for us and bad for us. But we've lost that as a species because, one, most of us were raised on food that had the intelligence removed. And then we were told not to trust our body. So don't eat when you're hungry, keep eating past you're full, eat this even though you don't feel like it or you don't have a kinesthetic, strong resonance with it. Just eat it because it's healthy, right? Because it has nutrients in it. So there's a large part of our, society that we're living in that's conditioning us to distrust our body. And the part about getting it right to me is about starting to listen to your body. And the thing about the keto diet, the Atkins diet, all those kinds of things is if you just change one thing in your diet, like just remove one thing like sugar, or just remove refined flour, or just remove refined dairy, that kind of thing, you're going to feel better. Doesn't mean that long term that makes it a good diet or that it's sustainable. So there are people who are going on the carnivore diet and they feel amazing. All their diseases disappear because by and large, particularly if they're eating, naturally fed animals, they're not eating processed food. And so they attribute all this benefit to the carnivore diet, which is not sustainable. Like for the human species, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable health-wise, and it's not sustainable environmentally. But it is better for people than eating a lot of processed food. And so, they'll gravitate towards that. But then what they'll find is after a period of time, usually it's around 6 to 9 months, they're going to find that it's not really working. Or what can happen is the actual process of it or the functionality of it works for a period of time. So they stick with it, even though their body's giving the subtle tips and signals to say, gee, maybe this terrible bad breath is a sign that I shouldn't be eating this way. Bad breath is nature's way of telling you, stay away from that person because genetically they're not a great match to create great offspring. All of that, acne, all these things, the signs of things that we're just naturally repellent to, not just to other people, but within ourselves. These are things that the body's communicating with you. So the right process to me starts with listening to the body. And then we move to observing the planet and how we've eaten as a species over thousands of years. And then looking at the cultures, who did it really well? Like who got it where their people were healthy and nourished? Oh, and then the social structures around what they ate, were really good and built up, community and emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence, all those things. Um, and what of those communities had a minimal impact on the planet? So getting it right involves a lot of things. But to make it really simple, there are ways that we can actually do this and not drive ourselves crazy and have to have lists and, detailed plans and hourly, things and potions and powders. There are ways.
Awesome. So I guess the question I have now is, for an everyday Joe like myself, how do I even start on the right path? I mean, I think I know what I'm eating is good for me. Eat my vegetables, eat the meats proportionately, don't eat too much sugar and stay away from the Coke. I mean, these are all common beliefs I would assume that the everyday man or woman would live by. But really, in your experience, what kind of philosophies have you developed that could really help someone like me or even the listeners?
Right. Well, I'll just clarify, there's no way you're an ordinary Joe.
Thank you.
Yeah, trust me. But there are a lot of people who are confused. There are a lot of people who have a lot of information. There's a great Mark Twain quote that it's easier to fool a man than to convince a man he's being fooled. And people will literally stick to something because they heard it, sometimes 10, 20, 30 years ago. Or they read a study that they don't know was highly influenced by, a food industry or something like that. So the big piece is to start to understand that you need to kind of empty. There's an expression about be like an empty rice bowl, because if you've got a full rice bowl, you have no room for knowledge, for new knowledge. And one of the things, if anything, I've learned over the years is that there's so much that we don't know. So I just go to, what do we do know? What is universally accepted as a species to lead to health? And so I start off people by understanding how we're meant to eat as the human species as far as bioavailability. And that's nature's principle. That's the first philosophy that I, developed that helped people understand, okay, how are we meant to eat? And then I went on to develop the consumption concept. I gave a TED talk on it in Tokyo 11 years ago now, next month. And then the third is the concept of slow eating. Now, not slow as in slow food, but slow as an acronym for seasonal, local, organic, and whole. So nature's principle is nature tells us what to eat and the quantities to eat it in by how easily it's obtained in nature. So that which is most abundant in nature, we require the most of. The harder to obtain in nature, the less we require it. And it usually tends to be more addictive. So because it's higher in energy, or harder to find, so the proteins and the sugars, nature gives us stronger physiological desires for it. So we're willing to work hard for it, right? Whereas the stuff that we need the most of, it's so easy and it's readily available. It's fast food in nature. And then the last group is, if you cannot get it in nature, not only do we not need it, it's harmful to the body and the planet. And what I teach in Return to Food is that what's good for the body is good for the planet, and what's good for the planet is good for the body without exception. So if you want to know if something's good for you, tear it apart and see, is this good for the environment? Because at one point it's going to come back to bite us if it's not. So if you go back to that first area of nature's principle, that which is most abundant, there's a hierarchy in which nature actually provides us what we need. So the nutrient we are actually most life dependent on, we can't survive seconds without. And I've had nutrition students where they've challenged me to say, well, first, actually, a lot of them say it's water. I said, no, seconds. And I'll say it's air. And they'll say, well, that's not a nutrient. I said, well, what's the definition of a nutrient? And that is that which is required for growth. And so I say, try and grow something without air in your body,
Right.
And so air is our primary nutrient. It's the most abundant, nutrient. We can find it everywhere, at least now. For now, we do. We don't have to buy it for now. And we're most life dependent on it. So then obviously the second most life dependent nutrient is water. 70% of the planet's water, composite wise, 70% of our body's water. So I think that's a really interesting correlation. And then if we look to the third most abundant source of nutrients that human species have survived and thrived on, it comes down to vegetation and things coming from the soil. And even, and look, in certain parts of the world, there isn't vegetation, like the Arctic, for 12 months a year. But they're also the least desirable parts of the earth to live in. Like real estate is location, location, location. There's not a big, massive millions of migration going, gee, I want to live up in the Arctic and eat seal blubber for 80% of my diet.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. So if we look at the thriving, healthiest cultures, they have a lot of vegetation in their diet. And in fact, even hunter-gatherers have 11 to 15 plant species for every animal species they have. And then they even have animal species in a hierarchy of that which is most easy to obtain, right? So if you think about vegetables, just really basically, there's way more vegetable species than fruit species. And vegetables are more available seasonally, typically on the planet. And fruit, even when it is, comes into its season, we don't eat it when it's mature. We eat it when it's ripe. And with the exception of some, fruits like avocados, they actually get most of their nutrients during the ripening process. So it's nature's way of saying, eat this down here and eat lots of it and get ready for this. That usually, for most cultures, obviously, except for the tropics, will keep you energized through the winter.
Right.
So there's this beautiful way that nature actually communicates to us. And we just need to start to listen to not just our body, but the planet. And then if you look at the consumption concept, so it's basically the philosophy is around, we'd make very different choices if we had to source our own food in nature. And it goes for a lot of things. How big would you build your house if you had to build all the materials and gather all the materials and put it together yourself? Mm-hmm. How big would you build your house if you had to heat it right. by gathering wood or, sourcing the fuel to, generating the electricity, all those things. So, and I think what's happening right now, particularly, with the climate issues and with COVID issues and people in self-isolation, and we're starting to rethink our relationship with the planet, these philosophies are, really timely. They're coming into their own. So when it comes to the consumption concept with food, it goes the same, that if we had to source our own food, we'd all be eating very differently. So myself included, probably wouldn't have coffee every day. Although I try and have a cup every second day, which oddly enough, during stressful times, I have coffee every day. So it's like my go-to drug. I thank the caffeine pushers, dealers, each time I go and have it. But, how much, like even totally natural things, like people say, well, how much fruit should I have? And I say, well, how much would you have if you had to source it yourself in nature? If you had to gather enough blueberries so that you had a cup of blueberries in your smoothie every single day, would you do that? Right? How would you store it, in a natural environment? So they had ways of actually storing things, preserving and drying things and all those things in a natural environment. But because of refrigeration, we've changed that, and it's changed our relationship with what we eat. If you were to source your own food in nature, no one that I know would go in and go, I'm just going to dump some chemicals on here. So the bugs get at it, right? Like no one, I know there are people who will spray, pesticides on their tomatoes, but no one I know does that. Because we now know that you don't just spray it on the plant and it's like has this unpermeable barrier that stops it and just goes off in the rain. When you spray a chemical on a plant, even if it stays on, some will actually go down when it rains and it's watered, it goes into the soil, and the plant will actually draw it up into its system when it's in the soil. And if you think about it, a healthy handful of soil can have over 8 billion microorganisms working synergistically to create this like mini universe that provides nutrients to the plant. If you put a toxic chemical on it that's designed to disable the nervous system of an insect, imagine what it's doing to that really delicate, beautiful microflora. So coming back to the consumption concept, I love to teach it this way. And I think of, omnivores or carnivores, and I say, for most North Americans, wherever this is going out to, if you're given a choice between dinner tonight, between an omelet and having chicken, what do you think most North Americans would choose?
That's a very good question.
If they weren't vegetarian.
If they weren't
vegetarian. Yeah. If they weren't, what do you think they'd choose?
I'm gonna go with chicken.
You would be right. And the statistics about our consumption would verify that, validate that. Given the same choice, but you have to go out in nature and source an egg to make an omelet, or you have to go out and catch, kill, pluck, disembowel, bleed, and prepare a chicken, how many people do you think would have the chicken?
Oh yeah, nobody. No way.
Yeah, not many, but even the hardened carnivores would think twice about going through all of that effort for one or two, or if they're really frugal, 3 meals, when they could have a source of eggs ongoing, right? So we make very different decisions if we have to source these things in nature. And I go through a hierarchy because if you look at hunter-gatherers, they ate in a hierarchy of what was most easily obtained. So the things that were easier to kill and process, and cook or whatever, were the things they had more of. A big beast was a tribal food that the whole tribe participated in. It wasn't, no one had tenderloin every night of the week in a tribe, unless maybe you were the king of the tribe, right?
Right.
So if you, and I look at it this way, that we tend to eat things, we find it easier to kill things that are less like us. So most people find it easier to kill an insect than a fish.
Mhm.
Most people find it easier to kill a fish than a chicken. And most people find it easier to kill a chicken than a lamb. And one day I was teaching this at a school in Australia. It was at a school, but was for adults. It was an after school session for the general public. Anyway, I was going through this, and all of a sudden this guy yells out, he goes, "I don't mind killing a lamb." And I said, "Oh, okay." He said, "No, I'm third generation lamb farmer. I grew up killing them. It's no worries for me." And I know if there's any Australians listening to this, is a terrible, terrible Australian accent, but it's the best I can do. Anyway, I said to him, I said, "Okay, so do you remember the first time you killed a lamb?" And I said, "Can you remember it?" And it's interesting because I didn't prompt him a lot, but he went back to that place.
Hmm.
And you could see he went from this cocky kind of, "I don't mind killing a lamb," to literally his head went down. And he went, "Yeah." And the smile was erased from his face. And I said, "Did you have to cut off a part of you that was human in order to do it?"
Hmm.
And he said, "Yeah."
Hmm.
Right. So I'm an omnivore. I'm not a vegan. I'm not a vegetarian. I'm plant biased. But what I do know is our relationship to killing animals for food is really messed up.
Hmm.
So the volume that we're eating and how we're eating it, and the lack of regard we have for, what many of us believe to be sentient beings, is, something that we need to change
Hmm.
now, that they're, because of the factory farming closing down because of, COVID and social distancing. So it'd be interesting to see our relationship with that change, because meat's really addictive.
Yes.
And it's going to be challenging for a lot of people. But
Now,
what a great,
for sure. Now, do you think because meat is so addictive, kind of like sugar or cocaine,
yeah,
is this
yeah,
why there's such a high level of consumption and why everybody would choose the chicken over the egg? I mean, if you think about it at a nutrient level, chickens and eggs, I mean, proteins is what you're looking for, right? I guess different
yeah,
textures and whatnot and flavor
yeah,
profile. But it's really interesting how that addiction really regulates and helps us make decisions, right?
yeah, it does. And it's so interesting because I've often been challenged by people saying it's not addictive. And I say, well, try and give it up. And what I also believe, I extrapolate on this, I don't have science and data to prove it. It's just a theory that I've had for over 20 years, is that if an animal is eating addictive substances, well, there is, plenty of information to show that it makes up their DNA. So if they're eating addictive substances, when you eat it, you can have an addictive response to it. It can bring out an addictive response in you. And also there's lots of hormones, and even if they're drug-free animals, there's hormones in animals that we can't help but not be impacted by. So it's a very interesting subject. I don't think it's black and white. I don't think things are cut and dry as a lot of people like to think about it. But what I do know is, as a species, and we're looking to protect the future generations of, like your daughter, we need to rethink our relationship to consuming animal products.
Yeah, for sure. And so if we were to look at addictions in general, not
Mhm.
only to meats, but to sugar as well.
Yeah.
Now, I know your relationship with sugar is very intimate and it goes very far back. Um,
Oh, I
but
didn't know you were going to get so personal so quick.
um, but if you look at this concept of sweet freedom, you know,
Hmm.
you're right. If you were to ask me, give up sugar tomorrow, I'd be like, you're crazy. I would love to. I know it's good for me, but I don't think I can. So, what kind
Yeah.
of methods
Yeah.
or tips or tricks would you suggest to the audience to say, if you wanted to start regulating the amount of sugar you ate, what would be the first thing to do that's really worked for others?
Yeah. So I have a 7-day challenge. It's free. You can go and check it out. Um, and basically, we do three things because most people are like you, and I certainly was like you, where the thought of giving it up like is just like that's crazy. Um, in my experience, going cold turkey works for a very small percentage of the population long term. There's very few people who can actually do that sustainably. Might work for a week, a month, 6 weeks, 6 months, a year, but unless you deal with the underlying cause of your addiction, going cold turkey, what usually happens for people is they just find a new addiction to replace it. So I'm not a big fan of cold turkey. But what I do try and get people to do is a 7-day challenge. And in that 7-day challenge, which we offer for free, I get you to do three things. So to reduce the amount of sugars you're having each day. So you're starting to cut down the amount of sugar. And then I use what I call, I get you to find the most natural versions of it. So instead of, refined white sugar or high fructose corn syrup, find something that has real natural sugars in it. Or using fruit as a replacement, or say something like if you love Reese's peanut butter cups, which is just a lot of sugar and fillers, there's very little chocolate in it, and salt, there's tons of salt in it too. I have a recipe for nut pucks, and there's a YouTube video for it. They're absolutely delicious. You'll become addicted to them, but it's a good way because you make little ones like this, and it takes 2 or 3, and you're completely satiated, and you're getting nourished while you're having it. And I call people who are addicted to nut pucks nut puckers. So what you do is you find the most natural version of the food you're addicted to, and what happens is because there's more nutrients in it, it takes less to satiate you. You're not just going after the high. So you're getting that flavor sensation. It's not going to be the same, but it'll give you, that kind of thing. You're also going to notice that you're not going to get this, and you're not going to get this low, right? Dipping,
Right.
which is a good thing. And so now we've got less sugar. We've got more natural sugars. And then what I get people to do through this process is start to nourish themselves, and to nourish with things that are energizing, nourishing, and protective. So what happens now is the body, as it's getting nourished, that will help diminish cravings. One of the reasons we crave is because our bodies are malnourished. And there's been lots of examples of, rat studies where they gave the rat a choice between water and alcohol. And when the rat was nourished, it chose the water. And when the rat was malnourished, it chose the alcohol. Evidence to show that when we're nourished, we're much more likely to choose nourishing things. And then as people go on, what I help people do is to a concept I call hypernourishment, where we start to look at, because when I started to work with people and said, don't eat this, eat that, kind of the typical dietitian nutritionist model, people had like this level of success. And then when I got them into the kitchen cooking and preparing their own food, they had this level of success. And then when I started to introduce the philosophies, and they got it here, right? So now they're getting it in the body because they're cooking and eating these nourishing foods. They're getting it here because they're now starting to think about food in a different way. And then when I worked on this concept of hypernourishment, where I started to realize when I was working with clients, it's not just food. We have toxicity mentally, emotionally, and spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And when we are malnourished mentally, emotionally, spiritually, either and or, we make poor food choices. So as I started to help work with people and remove toxic influences that were coming in mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and started to introduce nourishing versions of those things, it was so much easier to make decisions in their physical world about what they were eating and moving their body that made them feel good.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. No, that's a really, I never even thought of looking at it that way. I mean, physically, mentally, spiritually, and how our addictions to these poor foods are related to all that. So thank you for summing that up.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Yeah. So one of the problems with the nutrition model, which is why, I really like holistic nutrition, is for so long we've just treated the physical. We've just talked about the food, and for many years we didn't make the distinction between natural foods and processed foods. And then when we did go to more natural foods, we forgot that we're a whole complex being and not just a physical being, robot that makes food choices because it makes sense, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Oh, well, one of the things that when people are starting on this path, the philosophy of eating slow, seasonal, local, organic, and whole is just a great way to kind of start to know what we're meant to eat, because we're not meant to eat the same thing every day. That's the biodiversity of the planet depends on, one, us not eating the same thing every day, and two, we don't eat the same thing all over the globe.
Right,
So we need to start out by looking at what's in season
right.
and choosing our food based on that. And that puts less pressure on the environment. So does eating locally, organically, and whole means less processing. So all of it is good for the body and the planet.
Right. And so for those listeners who are wanting to be more aware of their eating habits and how to approach this, in a holistic way, how do they get in touch with you, and how do they work with you if they want to?
Well, thank you for asking. Do I have time to just mention one more thing?
Of course, yes.
Great. Okay. So I'm not a purist. I'm not interested in achieving nutritional perfection. And I have a concept called pick your poisons. So the human species, we have adapted to be able to handle certain things that are not just nourishing to the body. And I think it's one of the fun things. I'd much rather live to 100 years with chocolate than 120 without chocolate. And I believe that chocolate is God's way of saying he loves us and wants us to be happy. But here's the thing, I like real chocolate. And most of the chocolate on the supermarket shelf has very little chocolate in it. And most of it's sourced in a way that's, super unhealthy for the planet and most of the people who are actually working on those cacao and sugar farms. So it's not about not having these lovely, delicious things. It's about now starting to choose the better quality versions. The price alone will decrease your consumption for most people because to produce quality, it costs more. It's worth more, right?
Yeah.
And so the process doesn't have to be, one of an arduous, painful, deprived way of being. And in Return to Food, a book which, don't know if I got to show you this in person, but I did the illustrations for it.
Oh, wow.
And this is one of my favorite illustrations from the book. And it's a French proverb that it says, where love sets the table, food tastes its best.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the good things that's actually come out of this whole social isolation piece is that people are now getting into the kitchen because they got a lot more time on their hands than they used to. Or they're in their kitchens, they're in their homes. Like, what do I do? So people are starting to realize that actually cooking is not just not hard, but it's actually can be quite meditative and fun, and it tastes so much better, and it's good for you, and it can be a source of social connection. So my kind of ending piece before I tell you how people can get a hold of me is to start to set your table with love. And you don't even have to, like, I'm single, I have no children. My parents, are in Northern Alberta, so I eat most of my meals alone. But I promise you, I set my table every night with love. And that love is sewn into the food that I prepare. It's sewn into when I gather my food at the farmer's market, to really be grateful to those farmers who are literally, you want to talk about people on the ground saving our lives. Try and do that on the planet without farmers, right?
Right.
So yeah, there's lots of ways you can sow love into your food.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that picture. And the idea of setting your table with love is so powerful, and it really resonates with me as well. I mean, food is very dear to my heart, and without good food, I'm not a very happy person. Let's put it that way. So,
You're very lucky to have a Thai chef for a wife.
indeed, I am, and I thank her every day for that. So it comes back to it. I mean, people are probably dying to work with you now. They're so interested. I know I am. So how do we get a hold of you? Where do we find you? How do we do it?
Yeah, awesome. Well, so I'm actually pivoting right now. And with Sweet Freedom, I'm actually moving to more of a coaching model. So literally, if you want to have a session with me, you email me, Sherry at sweetfreedomlife.com or Sherry at sherrystrong.com, either or, and just put your name in the subject line, and they can organize a coaching session with me for free.
Awesome. Awesome. So for
Yeah.
those of you who are listening, or those of you on YouTube, I'm going to put all the description or all the information in the description below. So you don't have to write anything down, so you don't send it to the wrong email. And I want to take this opportunity to say thank you so much for your time, Sherry. It was such a blast and super informative. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody that's listening learned a lot too. So again, thank you for your time. And I don't know, Sweet Freedom sounds a lot closer than I thought.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, you have a good day, Sherry, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Alex. Take care.
Take care.
Okay.
I do what I believe, and what I believe is that everyone holds a story that can help someone else. Through coaching, I'm able to lead conversations, dig deep, and elicit personal experiences that lead to eye-opening insights. If you want more of this and learn from some of the most incredible people on this planet, go to coachalexlin.com/connectthedots.